I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, someone who is most definitely still involved with punk, Keith Freeman, my buddy, my pal, is here today for a conversation. And Keith plays in maybe more current bands than I think anyone we've ever had on the show. You may know him from Restraining Order. You may know him from Intimidation. You may know him from his new band, Grem. You may know him from Secrets of the Unknown. You may know him from multiple other projects. We'll talk about those in a second. A great guy, and I'm excited for you to hear this one moment, though, because first, if you want to get in touch with me, head over to the email address, turnedoutapunk@gmail.com. That is run by my brother, and normally guest booker extraordinaire, but definitely show producer, Tristan Abraham, and he will get the message to me. I booked this one all by myself. That's why it took 2 years to happen. You can find me on Instagram occasionally. I post videos on there, though, at LeftForDamian. You can find me on... That's it, really. That's the one. There's also a Facebook page, an Instagram page, a YouTube page, and a TikTok page for this podcast. All of those can be found at Turned Out a Punk on those platforms, and we post videos and edits and anything I can find time to put together, and Tristan can throw up, and we can put them out there into the world. So follow those, and you also occasionally get information about the show on those platforms as well. So good reason to follow them. I play in a band. We are called Fucked Up. You can find more information at fuckedup.cc. We have a brand new record coming out on Sub Pop called Disabuse. It's a 7-inch, and I am very excited that it's coming on Sub Pop. It's kind of like this meta tribute to Poison Idea, and pick it up wherever you buy your Sub Pop records. Probably from us or from Sub Pop. And there's a limited version of it with a Poison Idea tribute sleeve too. So get that now. We're playing in Yellowknife in March, and that's about it. So if you want to go to Yellowknife, come see us there. All right, on to the show. As I said off the top, today on the show, my friend Keith Freeman is finally here. It took me a very long time to make this happen, as are all the episodes that I wind up booking myself. Keith is someone that I got to know probably before we played together, but we've definitely toured together with Restraining Order and Fucked Up, and he is someone who I love talking to. We've got a lot of common interests, and someone who I feel like loves this music on a level that is truly, truly deep. He's someone who, God, plays in so many bands. Okay, let's try and we'll go through the list right now. So All Due Respect, Ammunition, Depths of Reality, Intimidation, Machines of Hate, who put out a new record last year, Maniac, Misfortune, Near Dark, Restraining Order, The Fight, Violence to Fade, and they don't even have all of them here on this list. So this is someone that is dedicated their life to playing this music, and someone who's very passionate about this sort of stuff, and someone who's got a lot more of a current perspective on the stuff that's going on than myself. So, as I say, I love talking to this guy, and I apologize to him that it took so long to make this happen, but now you get to hear it. If you want to check out more information about Keith Freeman and all of these incredible bands that he plays in, most of them do have social media and presence, and I will link a bunch of them in the bio below. But Restraining Order has got a couple shows coming up. They're going to be playing with American Nightmare, and they're going to be playing with they've got a few shows going up. They've got an Instagram page. Intimidation has an Instagram page. Grem Punk has an Instagram page. All those can be found at Keith X Awake on Instagram. He's got links to everyone there. They all have band camps too, so support Keith and check out all these bands. He's got a bunch of shows coming up. Like this guy plays a lot of shows and a lot of bands. All right, well, that's it. I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy Keith Freeman on Turned Out a Punk. Keith, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, in typical Damian booking fashion, this has taken years to come together. So I appreciate your patience on this thing.
No problem. I know we're both you get pretty busy, so
I feel like it's also a glimpse into the chaos that I exist in. I think my brother's level of organization in terms of like booking the guests is reflective a lot more of like all his abilities that I do not have. I do not have those abilities whatsoever. So, anyway, we're happening, making it happen now, and I'm really excited to talk to you because, in addition to liking the music you make, I feel like finding meeting you, finding out what you're into, obviously the wrestling stuff, but I mean like in terms of the music stuff, every time I feel like, man, I don't know if I'm still like maybe my world is kind of moved on. Like oh, it's all punk, right?
Hmm.
But I'm like, oh, maybe my the stuff I'm into has kind of moved on. And then like the stuff you're into and obviously the bands you play in as well. No, I'm very much in vogue with the stuff the youth are into these days. So I appreciate you coming on here to give me a youthful perspective, but also talking about all the stuff I love, which is hardcore punk.
Oh yeah.
Well, and it's funny because we talked about it on the podcast I did with Woj and Alex like not too long ago. That like it feels like now, and this happens over the course of punk and hardcore history that like hardcore and punk have kind of deviated from each other in a way, and there's like sort of a pull away of like hardcore from like sort of the punk stuff, and like to me, it's best when they're mixed together.
Yeah, I agree because I like everything. So, you know, when I get to go to a show where it's like, oh, bands from both of those sides, I'm all about it. I'm having a great time.
Well, before we get to there, we got to start where they all start, which is Keith. How'd you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it?
All right, so coming across it and getting into it, I would say two separate occasions. Uh, Coming across I thought about this a lot, to be honest. It would have to be through video games, probably Tony Hawk. Um, it didn't really stick. I was a big video game person as a kid from Nintendo, from Atari, actually. My grandmother had Atari up until, current days. But it had to have been PlayStation era, Tony Hawk, and also MTV skateboarding. I don't know if for those who remember that game, but I remember
What? No, what's
hearing
MTV skateboarding? I don't know if I even know that game.
I think it was just like a offshoot of a Tony Hawk. Like developers probably were like, "Oh, Tony Hawk is killing it right now. Let's like do our version of it." And it was essentially just like a Tony Hawk clone. But I remember like there were a lot of like um, punk songs and just rock songs. I'd have to like pull up the play like the actual soundtrack of it. But I just remember being at my aunt's house like during the summer playing the game and just hearing like the music. So it had to have been exposed to that maybe like late 90s, early 2000s because you know rock music in general was never in my household. Like I grew up on like a very like Christian, black family, so we listened to like a lot of gospel, and like my mom listened to like a lot of soul stuff, and my sister with like R&B and hip hop. So like rock music was never on my radar until middle school. Um, and that's when I probably truly started to get into like more alternative music and punk is middle school, and it's because of anime. I was big into Dragon Ball Z. Immediately met my group of nerd friends who were also into anime, and there was a little bit of crossover between anime and like, believe it or not, Linkin Park. There's a lot of music videos fans created, and that kind of like was my foot in the door to like alternative aggressive music, and then from then it was just like whatever radio uh, rock music was at the time, the Green Days and a lot of like pop punk at the time. Like MTV at the time was like either like pop punk or like metalcore stuff. So I was just kind of like a sponge absorbing it. And yeah, I was big into the pop punk stuff. Whatever was on MTV, like because I didn't really have access to buying CDs or downloading music and stuff like that. So just whatever was on TV, I was absorbing it.
It's interesting how much of a on ramp video games kind of are for punk. Like what Tony Hawk did with Amoeba by the Adolescents, like it
Hmm.
really gave that song a whole new life. And yeah, like expose so many people that otherwise wouldn't necessarily hear this music to this kind of music because as much as you're saying there's stuff on the radio and maybe it's different in the US, but I kind of remember into the 2000s as kind of the alternative like explosions dying off. There's less and less of that stuff showing up on the radio and it's kind of like more a return to sort of just sort of I guess rock music type thing. And once again,
Yeah.
it's probably different in the US because I think there's different radio formats down there that we don't have access to up here in Canada. We're very limited in our radio playlists up here.
Yeah, I would say these days I don't really listen to a lot of the radio, because obviously streaming services. But yeah, I just feel like that kind of music is just like not out there, like to the public like that.
Yeah, and it's also it's interesting at different times how there's like these sort of like on ramp, like the video games, but like bands that just
Hmm.
kind of like bring people into uh, this kind of world of like whatever that is, and it's the pop punk stuff. I guess Pope's Blink 182 was that like what Nirvana was or what Green Day was and the Offspring were at other times, and I guess prior to that it would have been like the Clash and bands like exploding like that. But these were like the bands that kind of like brought people in. Suicidal Tendencies too, I guess, having MTV videos.
Yeah. The Blink era is definitely like more that them and the contemporaries of the time is like what I got into in terms of like punk stuff. Like that was it. Um, and then I'm a nerd, so like eventually when I got into hardcore, I just wanted to know everything and kind of digging into the history.
What was the first hardcore band you kind of heard about? Like, I guess it would have been on Tony Hawk games. They had hardcore bands, right? There's the well, certainly examples of it. There's like the Gorilla Biscuits cover by Fall
Hmm.
Out Boy.
Yeah. Um, I know like Dead Kennedy. People talk about the Tony Hawk, Police Truck, Dead Kennedys. But here's the thing: like me listening to all of that, it didn't really register back then. It was just like in the game. It wouldn't be until like later I would revisit the stuff and be like, it's one of those cases where you listen to something, you don't really know what's going on or appreciate it, and then later you get into it and you're like, oh well, I wish I like clung on to this earlier because I would have been more into. I wouldn't have missed a lot of things that I ended up missing. I was very late to the game in terms of like actively, you know, going to shows and getting involved in the scene.
Well, like, what was the first concert you went to? Like, it doesn't have to just be like punk or hardcore. I mean,
So
for show.
I'm trying to think. I didn't really get into this stuff until like late high school in terms of actually going to shows. So I'm trying to think. It was definitely like Taste of Chaos or something. Like I want to say like senior year, 2006 probably.
Who was on that one?
Deftones headlined. Um, it was a lot of metalcore and pop punky stuff. I want to say like Story of the Year. Atreyu played. I went with like a couple buddies from high school. So that was like, yeah, it was probably like my first concert. I was a very sheltered kid, so my mom was not like into like any of this kind of music. Anything with distorted guitar, she thought it was like, you know, blasphemous kind of in a sense. So, and I was not a bad kid, so I kind of was just like, okay, and you know, stuck to my lane. Before I got into punk and stuff, I was a big arcade nerd, so I would just go to the arcade on the weekends with my friends, and I was cool with that.
My mom wasn't necessarily religious, but she was pretty strict on
Hmm.
stuff, and she told us repeatedly, like, if I ever catch you in an arcade, because
Oh,
the arcades were like arcades are still illegal in Toronto because that was like the
really?
worst place in the world you could hang out. Oh yeah, my friend Bear and I talk about it all the time. How like you go to the arcade and like it could be any number of things that would befall you. Like there'd be drug dealers, there'd be like hustling going on, there'd be all sorts of stuff like that. But then there'd also be like army recruiters and like religious recruiters coming in trying to pick up these kids that were just like they're playing these video games. So yeah, I was very much forbidden. So the fact that you got to go and chill in arcades to me is like, oh, that's wild. That's scary shit. But I guess they had changed by that point. Like you couldn't smoke in them anymore.
Yeah, no, this was just like, you go there, I would play my little fighting games and my little dancing games, and there was like a whole squad of just, I don't know, nerd kids. Like we all just were like a giant clique. It was cool. Essentially, like, the hardcore scene, but like it's funny how like everything has its own little scene. But there was the arcade scene.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. Like how it's just like everything is just this little sort of click thing that forms whatever it is that you're interested in, kind of around these things.
Hmm.
And I think we're all lucky that we got into punk and hardcore because that's the one that has international travel. It's the one that has like all these sort of like great upsides to it that you don't necessarily find in like I was a Dungeons and Dragons kid, and if I had
Hmm.
really stuck with Dungeons and Dragons as my like world,
Hmm.
I don't think I would have ever gotten to tour Japan, for example. Like maybe there is a way to tour Japan by being a D&D, a traveling DM, but I think language barrier would become a big thing in Dungeons and Dragons. It's not the case with punk.
Nope, that's a universal connector of the world.
So when did you start playing music?
So I started like a little bit before that. I started. I thought like all the MTV metalcore stuff was hardcore, and then I started looking up local hardcore bands, and there was this band called Chuck Brunswick from my area, and it was playing a town over. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to that, and it was at this bar that we used to have. They used to have shows every single Sunday, no matter what, called Cabot Street Pub, and I got dropped off there, and I was just first hardcore show, actual hardcore show, was just like, whoa, this is crazy. This is like so intimate. This is so much energy. And I just went every single Sunday, no matter what. Like I literally got a job just so I could like go every to the show every Sunday because I didn't have a lot of money. And I want to say after 2 or 3 shows, I was like, I want to do that. So I had like a guitar, like a shitty first act guitar from like one of those like starter kits or whatever, that was just like dormant in my room. So I was like, all right, let me pick that up and learn how to do power chords, and you know, just kind of went from there. I was a musician in middle and high school anyway. I played trombone for 6 years in concert band. So like, nerd stuff. But so like I could read music at the time for that, but when I play guitar, I just went by ear, like um I it was all around the same time of me like diving into hardcore altogether. So like I got the American hardcore book around then, and I started like I want to know the origin, so I started digging into like all like the you know the gateway bands, I guess, Minor Threat, Bad Brains, SSD, and I just like those are easy to play like on a, well, not Bad Brains, but like those are easy to play with power chords. So I just like would practice like straight edge, like na 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 na, and so I play guitar first, and then ended up joining a band. I don't know. Am I going too fast with
No.
this? With this?
Well, I was going to say,
Okay.
what was that first band that you went and saw? What style were they? Like Chuck Brunswick was it?
Yeah, they were called Chuck Brunswick. Kind of like around that time, I would say like for like Bridge Nine was really big in hardcore. Like that's like I was immediately made a Bridge Nine board account. But like Have Heart, Verse, Guns Up, like those kind of bands were heavy on my radar. And I think Chuck Brunswick was like kind of like similar along those lines. Um, which is funny because the guitar player I'm still friends with to this day. Like I literally just saw him on Friday. But I mean, I'm always like, yo, you're the reason why I got into hardcore. But yeah, it was like them, another local band called Shoot the Kill, which would become a very important band. Um, they were kind of like the kings of the hardcore in my area of Western Mass, and yeah, similar vibe with them. A little bit more on a little thrash like crossover influence into it, but yeah, it was like those kind of bands. And then I want to say my second or third show was like 100, 100 Demons, and from Connecticut. And let me tell you, I had no I had no idea what I was getting in store for. I was just like, oh wow, it was pretty intense show, kind of a make or break show. It's like a show like that, you're like either not gonna go to shows anymore, or you're gonna be like, I'm strangely attracted to this. This is awesome, and it was the latter. And yeah,
Western Mass has such an amazing history of like hardcore
mm-hmm.
throughout it, and yeah, like even when we started playing, I remember like Guilt Lust and Prowl and like this sort of like era of bands, Out Cold obviously, but like going
Mm-hmm.
back to like Deep Wound and Outpatients and Jay, by the way, said you guys were awesome the other night, but his kid had car trouble, so he had to leave
Oh
before he got it. But he really enjoyed the set, and so I feel like there's like this sort of lineage to punk. Were you able to tap into that right away because of like obviously reading American Hardcore probably about Deep Wound?
yeah, so like I pretty much got into like every era of hardcore. Like I was heavy at the time. Like I got into it through like more of a modern touch. Um, Even like my area, like we did have like the last line, um, prowl, like the more that side of it, but I wasn't immediately exposed to like going to those kinds of shows. I was more of like the more like metal leaning, you know, kind of violent side of it. So I was because I didn't have a car. Like I didn't even get my license until I was like 27. I know it's crazy, but
I still don't have mine.
okay, so I'm not
No,
alone there.
no, I'm way more immature than you.
So I could only get to like the shows that were close to me, like very very close to me, and it was that. But I certainly like was listening to everything that I could with especially older bands, especially with Soulseek being such a prominent thing at that time. I don't know if you ever dabbled with that, but it was a godsend program, file sharing program, and I would find out about a band and just download the entire discography. And like so I just had like I would alphabetize it and just have like everything, everything. And shout outs to old school Mike. It was like a somebody on Soulseek from California, like an old head who literally just had every single band, like in his life, like every band you could think of, even if they played like a basement once and recorded like some like something on like a 4 track or something. He had everything. So I would just spend the day just downloading everything from him. So yeah, I kind of dived into it like listening wise early on, but
I feel like there's like a real sort of I don't know, like a selflessness that's involved in those people that upload that stuff to the internet and are like constantly making sure that it's coded at the right bit rate or that this thing that's never been available is available for free. Like
mm-hmm.
people are, and even like on YouTube, like I'm like, who's sitting there with their VCR plugged into their computer doing this, being like, people need to see Avail playing this basement in 1997. Like, I need to make this available to the world. Hats
I'm
off
glad.
to them because I'm watching it, I'm consuming it. But
Same. Like they're definitely a godsend for doing that.
that's I think the thing that's cool about punk and hardcore is that there is the need to do that. I think you see it also in other cultures, like you see in Grateful Dead stuff. Like Grateful Dead fans, I think do the same sort of thing. Maybe not
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I think historically, Grateful Dead fans did that. I don't know much about Grateful Dead culture in the present day, thankfully.
Me either.
Yes, but for small graces go I. Uh, so, what was the first band you played in?
So it's funny. I put on my MySpace profile like I want to be in a band. I play guitar, kind of. And there was this band where they were from Maine, but the bass player was going to school at like one of the colleges around here because we have a bunch of colleges, Hampshire College, like UMass, and so they moved down here and wanted to continue the band. It was a band called Use Your Head with an exclamation point. Use your head. And I was just like, I was so scared because like I hadn't really been playing guitar like that long, but I was just like, let's do it. And so we had her first practice, and I learned the songs, and it was pretty straightforward. I mean, I'm pretty lucky to be in like a kind of sick band to be my first band. They were like a mix between like at the time like No Ways Records bands and like Locking Out bands. So like they would have like the kind of like early '80s influence, like fast stuff, and then it would go into like a da 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 da, like so it was pretty sick. I enjoyed being in that band.
I tell it was locking out with the exclamation point. I
Yep.
feel like a punctuation in a band name is a very locking.
And on since you just referenced Grateful Dead, one of the designs was the Grateful Dead bear in a noose because our singer did not like the Grateful Dead at all.
I, at this point in my life, like there's definitely Grateful Dead songs where I'm like, yeah, I can see that. But I was on tour with my friend, and he played like some Grateful Dead live bootlegs,
Hmm.
and it's amazing how quickly that hatred came back. As I'm hearing them noodle on a keyboard for like 20 minutes.
I never really dabbled with Grateful Dead. I might check it out. Like this is one of those bands. They're like obviously like a big name. Like Deadheads are dedicated. Cultist followers. But I don't know, I feel like I'd probably appreciate a lot of aspects of it at this point in my life.
They're one of those
Maybe not.
band. Well, they're like, yeah, they're one of those bands where I would put them in the same camp with Kiss that way, where the aesthetic makes
Hmm.
it look way cooler than when you hear the music and you're like, oh, this is what it is. Like,
Yeah.
I thought it was going to sound like demons or the Grateful Dead. Like I heard it, I was like, oh, this is probably going to sound like Nebula. I don't know what I thought it was going to sound like, but it was not sort of this jammy, rootsy, folky kind of rock and roll, which now I've got love for on a couple tracks. But those jams, like there's nothing like going to a punk and hardcore show, and I think like once you kind of connect with going to a concert like that, it kind of just ruins live music afterwards.
Yeah.
Like I can't like unless it's like I don't know even any type of concert I go to that's not a punk and hardcore concert, I just feel like this is kind of weird. Like and I know logistically you can't see Green Day on the basement of someone's house
Hmm.
or in a small club or where you can get right up close to the stage. Like I know that just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
But
Well,
at
you would
this,
prefer that.
yeah, I think I could going to a concert like that just doesn't feel like how I need to see live music. And they were an amazing live band. They put on a really cool show. There was like a plane that was dropping shit on the audience. There was
What?
like, yeah, they was like this like the Dookie plane fly out and drop shit on the crowd from the sky.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was like a Vegas show. There's like all sorts of explosions and
Yeah.
screens playing movies, but I don't know. It just doesn't beat being right up close to the band while they're playing it.
No, I'm definitely with you on that, like for sure. And my attention span is like not great. So like that's why I like hardcore because usually it's just for punk it's just like bam. But like seeing a band live, like seeing like a Doom or like a stoner rock band live, like I don't know if I could do it because my like after like especially being a non partaker of drugs, I probably would just my mind would just be like, all right, I gotta go somewhere. I can't just sit here.
My love
Yeah.
for stoner rock came from my straight edge days. Like
Oh yeah.
I just like that kind of music, and I like the vibe of just going to see something that's so intentionally heavy,
Hmm.
and also like that it's not violent in the way that like a lot of hardcore is. It's just like people like were just rocking out to it. I'm like, this is such a weird, different kind of vibe than going to like a Hundred Demon show or,
Oh yeah, for sure.
but I think geographically, me seeing a Hundred Demons in Toronto was nuts. But like you seeing that in Western Mass was probably like another level of nuts.
Yeah, in a bar that's like very like maybe like 100 is pushing it, like 100 cap. Like so, here I am. I passed the test.
I find it's interesting how like moshing's gone. Where we played like Outbreak Fest recently in the UK, and they had like a lip on the stage before the stage, so kids could do like stage invasions
Oh,
without.
yep, yep.
And it was just like constant like kids kind of parading, and it was very gentle, like very unlike it used to be. But then there's also like a level of moshing that's just ridiculously hard now and
Oh yeah,
ridiculously violent to the point where it's fascinating how like it's just not I don't know, it just seems like it's changed so much from like what it once was, and it's gotten more extreme in both directions.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think it's gotten more extreme, but also like still kind of like soft. I don't know how to like put it. Not soft, but like it's just everybody's like usually friends, and it's just like, oh, haha, like like it's more. I don't want to say acceptable, but it's more like normal, casual.
What's the
Whereas
music? Sorry, go on. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was gonna say, whereas back then, like you kind of like you had to you had to like show respect, kind of, because like there's like the older people doing their thing. You know, it was there's like unwritten rules, kind of going to shows. Whereas like if nobody really knew you at the time, you kind of had to like earn your stripes, sort of sense. At least for those kind of shows.
Because of the algorithm on social media, I would get these videos of like just dudes going around the room punching the people in the face that were watching the show. And I cannot. There were definitely shows where that would happen,
Mm-hmm.
like a Left for Dead type show, where or Haymaker type show. But even then, I think that's greatly exaggerated to what this looked like. Like this was
I know
just
what you're talking about. I get those, and I hate seeing.
well, like
I
what
hate the,
what genre is that? Like, is that's not beat down music? Would it be?
I don't. It's like kids. Like you know how like when a band is prominent and like the kids like it and they try to, they start the bands and it's cool. Like you're doing your first band or second band or whatever, and they're trying to replicate it, but they're not quite there. It's a lot of that, and it's like I don't even know. I don't. That doesn't happen where I am. So
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
see that, I'm like, where is this happening? You know?
That's what I wonder too. Like, I'm like, is this something that just exists on social media? This like, is it being shot in a soundstage in LA and just being put up for engagement on social media? Because I can't imagine that where that show would happen.
I think it almost feels like they're just doing that, yeah, like just to try to be viral on the internet or something. Like I'm like, this can't be real. It's like comically like almost unreal. But
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting how social media has just changed everything and how quickly it's changed everything, and punk and hardcore in particular because now everything has social capital,
yeah.
and punk is a place where we all were desperately craving social capital,
Hmm.
and now there's a way to get it from moshing or putting on a show, like things that traditionally you'd have to get on stage to get or do a zine to get maybe.
Hmm.
You can now get through just telling people that this is what you do, and it's not necessarily for the worst because I think it's caused a lot more people to be involved and want to be involved because it looks so cool, but it's also I don't know, I'm out of touch. So maybe it's just for the best and I'm just out of touch.
No, it's definitely a double edged sword. But I will say, pre COVID pandemic, um, it was to the point where it's like, how do kids get into this kind of music now? Because there's no like, like Warp Tour, like MTV, like what we were talking about earlier. That was like a gateway for me, or like a lot of people. And it's like, what would be the gateway now? And they just couldn't think of anything. And then, during lockdown, where like TikTok and YouTube, people watching a lot of YouTube videos. I don't know when it happened, but like when shows came back, so there was like a just every scene can attest to this. There's just like a whole influx of just like kids. I coined the term TikTokers that just go to shows, and it's like breathing life into like scenes everywhere. And they, a lot of them don't really know the history or like anything going into it. Like we're talking about how like there's like a respect factor. You go to shows, you kind of see how things are going, um, and you pick things up. They just kind of just go full force in, and it's like I think it's cool because you go from booking a local show like around here where there'd be like 20 people to like 100 plus on a weeknight, in a small practice spot and a town over, and it's like it's a cool thing. I don't have to drive to Boston, anymore all the time. I mean, I still do, but like it's cool to have that, you know.
It's interesting to have a world now with, like you're saying, there's like decentralized scenes. Like it used to be like everyone would have to go to a certain place, and there'd be obviously multiple places in a given area popping off at a given time, but now it can just be like you've got a band and all of a sudden it shows up on enough people's radars that you can build your own little scene where you live. You don't have to even drive an hour.
Yeah, like my area particularly is awesome right now. Like the show the other day we played, um, it was like downtown Amherst. I haven't played Amherst in like over a decade, to be honest, and like it was just so wholesome to like to have a show so close to home. It was sold out, and just it was great. I didn't have to drive, like I said, like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, hour and a half to get home. It's great.
Yeah. And it's like you're saying, like it's a double-edged sword because this TikTokers or TikTok core or like this whole like wave of people don't necessarily relate to it in the same way. But I think that's the thing that everyone in punk and hardcore gets caught up with is when the next generation doesn't relate to it in the
Hmm.
same way that you did. There's a tendency to want to invalidate it because you want to hold on to your little section of what this is, and it becomes so important to you that it's this thing. But the only thing that's going to make it valid is the fact that it's going to carry on. Like that's the only thing that
Hmm.
stops it from being like swing music or like third wave ska revival or something. Like is the fact that this thing will keep on carrying on and bringing new kids in. It's going to change what it looks like every time, and we you got to let it go.
Yeah, and it's weird because like I'm the old head now in my area, and it's so weird for me because I was that kid, you know what I mean? When I going to shows, and now they're like looking at me in a sense, and like you can't, and like you said, you can't really like it's different from the way you see it when you start going to shows. It's definitely different, but you can't really get too hung up on it because it's like it's still like you said, it's still going to happen. What you can do is, you know, you notice the same kids that are like really, really about it. You can say, hey, like you're listening to this. Have you ever checked out this band or that band? Or I have some shirts or like some old records that I'm gonna give to you. Like, like you're contributing in that way. And they will appreciate it, hopefully.
Well, and I think like on social media and these places where people are turning for education on this music, there's
Hmm.
so many bad actors filling these spaces and people that have no relationship to this music on any level that are informing and misinforming in some cases about stuff. And because of that, there's good people obviously out there doing stuff, but like because of that, people come in and maybe have misconceptions or misunderstandings. And like you're saying, unless like that's the way punk and hardcore always worked, is you make your way into a show and one of the older people would be like, "Hey, you should check out this thing like that," or "Don't mosh like an asshole," or there was like these rules that would kind of be handed down to you and imparted on you, and because of like the pandemic, like you said, and because of the way people got into it, you don't necessarily have to have these sort of like things given to you to find your way into the scene now.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I definitely had a lot of help in getting into a lot of the bands that I consider my favorite bands to this day because of stuff like that. Meeting people and they're like riding around with them, like, yo, you ever listen to this? You ever listen to this? And I'm like, no, no, you know.
Well, it's interesting how much that informs the sound of a scene at different times. Like you can tell, like, oh, a certain record became popular, and because of that, a whole little microcosm of bands kind of formed around that, and because of that, the sound became it went a certain way with those bands, and yeah, like you need, especially now, like where you have everything at your the whole history of punk and hardcore at your fingertips. So everything is one piece of information, and so how are you going to wade through this? Like, how are you going to find out the wheat from the chaff?
Yeah. Kids can really just and the kids that are getting into hardcore are just stumbling into like just these random eras of hardcore and these bands. And sometimes it's like bands that like an older head will be like, oh, nobody cared about this band when they were a thing. And they're just like the hugest band because like this new wave of kids, they all, like you said, somebody got into it and showed all their friends, and now they're all like super into like this band or style of music, and they're all like starting bands like that, you know, tracking down shirts and stuff. So like the nerdum is there, like it's there, it's pretty strong, but it's not like they're digging from like the source. They're just finding like, or maybe it is for them, it's the source because if a kid is, like into like a more metal leaning band, they'll be like the early 2000s will be something that they like see as a source as opposed to like us going to like agnostic front or something, like for hardcore or like I don't know. It's kind of funny to think about it that way, but it's like I've accepted it, at this point. It's fine.
But that was also, I find it was all like, I remember being like a youth crew kid during the youth crew revival, or like an attempting person to be a youth crew kid during the youth crew revival, I should say, and
Mm-hmm.
getting clowned on so hard by the older like punk kids that had lived through it the first time, and
Mm-hmm.
hardcore kids that had been youth crew kids the first time. Like, why are you doing this? Like these bands, no one cared about Unit Pride back, and I'm like, they're the greatest band of all time. Like, how could you have not have cared about this thing? And like, how could you have not held on to this Unity 7-inch, which is one of the greatest records ever?
I
But
agree.
like a lot of people I found just will dismiss the stuff that they like just wasn't like, it was either their contemporaries when they were into different shit, or like no one cared about that shit back then. Like that was just like nerd shit back then. And now it's
Mm-hmm.
like, so it's interesting how that has always been kind of present in hardcore, and I guess now because kids have access to everything, like you can
Mm-hmm.
fixate on the most minute little tiny scene. And I say this as someone who fixates on the most minute tiny scenes that seemingly no one really cares about other than myself. But now there's tons of kids that care about it because you can crowdsource like a whole scene for it.
Mm-hmm. But a good thing about this too is that a lot of these kids are also just sponges. So they're very open minded to what they hear. It's not like they're just like, oh, I only like this like style. They literally like everything, and that's why diverse shows I feel like, are important because you're being exposed to something that's not in your lane, I guess, or maybe you are because a lot of the kids like just do like everything.
I wonder if it's going to also have the effect of making things hyper regional again,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because you're going to be focused on your local band. It's going to make things way smaller. You don't necessarily need to be aware of what's happening outside of your local scene, because this is like where you can
It's
kind
your
of go for shows, and yeah,
it's your bubble.
It's your bubble, exactly. And there's it's going to be fed to you by your algorithm geographically where you are, and because there's so much music out there, why would you need to focus on anything but what's happening locally and maybe the local history too, as well? Um, yeah, the technology really does impact punk and hardcore, like tapes and photocopiers. Like this thing would not exist without those technologies early on.
Yeah.
It would have evolved very differently without those technologies, right?
Hmm.
You're like a guy who's gone around the world for this stuff, and I think those are like I think the tape was huge in making this an international scene.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. I'm looking to my right. I have like my wall of cassette tapes that I have. I mean, not as impressive as what I see behind you, but yeah, no, like
Don't go down my path, please. You're entering your old era right now. Don't throw your life away.
no, records and tapes are the one thing that I like. I don't actively collect, but like I will never get rid of. Like that's like it slowly but surely it's still growing, but like not as much as I used to, but it's still there.
Because you're
But
like a super collector for other stuff too, right? Like you do collect a little bit of tapes and records, but you also collect books and manga and
yeah, so I did have an okay comic collection. It wasn't like an old comic collection. It was like New 52 era, like Batman. Like I got into really heavy, and that's when I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna start doing comics. And I was heavy on like the DC stuff for a while. Like I had like the whole run of Batman, Green Lantern, like those are like my top two and for like DC stuff. And I ended up selling a lot to to go on tour a few years ago because I needed money and I was like I need to sacrifice something like because the older I get, the more less the less what's the word, the less attached I am to like physical things, with the exception of records. I don't want to get rid of those, but everything else that I collect, I'm okay with letting go. Like if it's for like reasonable cause, like to go on a tour that places I've never been before, that's like a big like win for me in any situation. So like I can justify, you know, sacrificing some collections for that. But yeah, I had a pretty, I would say pretty dope uh record collection. I mean comic collections. I still have a bunch of trades. I'm looking at them right now. I still have a bunch of trades, but
would you get them like graded, like to sell them type thing? Did you have to?
no, no, I wasn't on that level. Just like a casual collector. Same with like figures. Like there's an anime I like a lot. Like I have a One Piece, got the One Piece tattoo right
I
there.
know we bonded with that over you, me, and my eldest Holden.
Oh yeah, I have a ton of One Piece figures. They're all in a store. They're all stored away in the basement right now. But I could probably sell those for like quite a bit because those go for a lot. It's kind of annoying collecting those. But yeah, it's pretty much what I have left. It's just like records and like random like comic figures all over the place, and like clothes. Obviously, I have way too many shirts.
It it really has changed the way people collect, looking at stuff getting slabbed. And
Mm,
I remember going to record, I think it was like Millennial Rain, and we went over to
mm.
John Gerson's house, and he had like a bunch of hockey cards like slabbed, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? He's like, oh, this is like you get it graded now. Like you send it away to Beckett, and then
Oh
they
yeah,
grade it, and then they give you like a grading on your card and register it. And I'm like, that's fucking weird. And then to watch it spread to comics and then toys, and now you see Steve Aoki slabbing like lip cream bootlegs and shit. Oh, what
one
are the?
One Piece trading cards. I
Oh man!
forgot to mention that.
But like to see people start slabbing punk and hardcore records, that to me is like, oh, collecting's over. Like this is where or maybe the physical object in punk and hardcore is over at that point because these things no longer serve a functional purpose. They're just a commodity and therefore no longer part of what makes this thing what it is, which is functional things over commodity.
Yeah. Also, people are getting records graded like that, like hardcore
Oh,
records.
you haven't seen this?
No.
Oh, dude, yeah, Steve Aoki, he graded like a Gorilla Biscuits on purple, like framed it, slabbed it, and like had that graded, which I get. Like, no, I don't get, but like I can, that's a record like that. But then I saw someone sent me a video of him slabbing like some lip cream Kill IBM bootleg from the early 2000s, and I'm like, there's no way that's worth sending off to some guy to put in a mylar box that you can never open to listen to again.
Yeah, I don't think I like this. Like you said, like framing something is fine. Like if it's like a original victim in pain or something. I keep referencing agnostic front, sorry.
They're a great
But
band.
like I would do that, but sending it out to get graded, like I don't like that. But whatever.
Well, because
I'm one
yeah,
of those
because
people. It's like whatever. Like it's not really affecting me, I guess. So whatever. But
no, it doesn't. Yeah, that's the other thing is like it's all people talk about outrage culture. Like this is truly outrage culture. If I'm getting upset about what someone else is choosing to do with their records, like I really do have too much time on my hands, and I think that's a large part of me stepping away from social media is realizing like why do I care what Steve Aoki does with his records? Like it really does not affect me one bit.
yeah, it's like I fight with myself a lot with that, seeing stuff on social media sometimes. I'm like, just gonna continue on with my day.
Yeah, yeah, because it does. You can feel it pull you in, and
Hmm.
that's what it wants. Like it wants you to say something that hopefully someone will get upset about, and they'll say something back, and like that's you're getting sucked in. I get sucked in all the time to this thing. I got to constantly delete it, post something, and then delete it immediately.
Going on Twitter and seeing like some like newer person going, I just don't think Straight Ahead is a good band. Like I don't like something like that. Like I would just become irate, and I'm just like you said, I was just like I'm not even gonna put my effort into it because you know what? I know they're the best fucking band in the world, and that's all that matters.
I feel like I cannot get mad at someone for saying that when I'm the guy who's constantly complaining about Fugazi and the Clash. So I feel like they're let he without sin cast the first stone, and I definitely have certainly sinned on not saying some wild, outlandish opinions about bands and records over the years. I think that's part of the fun about it too, though. With punk and hardcore, is like you want to kill your idols constantly, and you want to
Hmm.
like tear down these great bands, these classic bands, and it's fun to do that and kind of like write your own history with it. Because like rock history and music history, it's all so rigid and like it's clearly defined. Like, oh, the Beatles are the greatest band of all time, and the Rolling Stones are the greatest band, and these bands are the best, and you can't beat them. And like, this is the pantheon. Whereas in punk and hardcore, man, everyone shits on everyone's heroes.
Yep. Especially when those heroes reunite and you see them now, and you're just like, oh, like they kind they kind of just ruin themselves, and you're just like, oh, okay, well, wish I didn't see that because now I'm going to listen to this record and feel some kind of way. I don't. I usually like still will be fine with it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, but we're all our own worst enemies to our legacies sometimes. Where
Yeah.
that's why the best bands are the bands that no one knows anything about. Like, oh, they're so mysterious. Did you hear this about them? Did you hear this about them? And it's just like Gauze. Gauze
Yep.
is the greatest
I
band
was
of all
literally
time.
just thinking about Japanese hardcore when you said that.
Yeah, and like I feel like Gauze is just one of those bands that it's perfect, and no one knows anything about the inner workings of the band. No one. There's just like these rumors and sort of like conjecture about how the band operated or what they did, and it just makes them chase. Like we don't, none of them had social media. We didn't get to the inside of how their minds worked. It's just like they were this band that came out, made perfect records, and every show they played was just killer.
I'm very sad that I'll never see. I will say never, never, because they broke up, but you never know. But I never got to see them, so I'm
I
sure you got to see them a couple times.
one time,
One time,
one time when I was making the wrestlers,
okay.
the day we were shooting the DDT episode. Um, I was like, "Fuck, please let me go early, please let me go early," because I didn't have a ticket.
I knew that. I heard you talk about it on a previous episode.
Did I talk about it? Sometimes I tell the same stories over and over again on this thing.
That's
I
fine though. That's
I,
that's
I
a cool
cut
story.
I cut it out sometimes. I'm like, okay, let's go back, and I've told this story too many times about MVP Zach Blair and the Misfits. Let's definitely edit this out right there. Uh, yeah, but like, yeah, getting to see Gauze was one of those moments that I'm grateful I got to have. But you got to go to Japan. You got to tour there.
Yeah, that's been my childhood dream. Like I mentioned, being into like anime early on, I was hugely like fan of like anime and just like Japanese culture in general because of it since like elementary school. So it's always been my dream to go to Japan, and through this really funny world of hardcore punk, I was able to do it, and it was the best, the climax of my life. Like I could, the world could end tomorrow and I'd be content because I got to go to Japan. And it was incredible.
I feel like that is the you know as much as I say I'm not going to be touring for for a long ass time. If
Mm-hmm.
someone was like, "Hey, do you want to tour Japan?" I'd be like, "Yep, I'm packing my bags right now. I just
That's
let's go before you change your mind."
that should always be the exception for everybody listening. If you have a chance to go to Japan, do it. Do it.
Did you guys tour there too?
We're crazy. So we did um Australia into Southeast Asia, including 2 days in China, which was fucking awesome, and then Japan, all back to back. So we did Australia, Southeast Asia, Japan.
How long was that whole tour? Like months? A month?
Yeah, it was about a month because of the traveling. Australia was about a week. Southeast Asia was like maybe like 5 shows, 6 shows, and Japan was also like a week. So it was like a week each, but with all the traveling and stuff, it came to like a little over a month, I would say, or maybe a month on the dot.
We've never toured Japan. We've only played three one-offs there.
Oh, okay.
Um, but I would love to tour. Did you guys tour by the train or did you tour in a van?
We had a van. So our homie Hideta, shout outs Hideta, um, like picked us up and pretty much had like him and his homies like drove us to all the shows. It was like Osaka, um, and then I forget exactly because I'd have to like look at the flyer, but it was a bunch of areas that were like relatively close to Tokyo. So we were able to set up like a home base where we would stay every night and just like, branch out to each part and then just come back at the end of the night. And it was like 4 or 5 shows, maybe four, maybe 5 shows.
Wow, that's so wild. Like I because most of the bands I know that tour there tour by the train because it's so
Yeah,
expensive, I guess, to with tolls.
yeah, I don't know. He hooked us up.
Oh, that's
Hooked
awesome.
us up.
You guys also toured like you guys played Thailand too, right?
Yeah, we did. So for Southeast Asia, we did in China, we did Beijing, in Hong Kong, and then Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, Bangkok.
Were you playing with like local bands everywhere you went?
Yeah, yep.
What kind of
Um,
was it? Pretty much everyone doing like straight up hardcore, or were there like,
for the most part, it's cool. I did a tour journal. I didn't know my phones have a journal feature, so I reviewed every single day and I watched every single band and I wrote about every single band that I saw.
oh,
Um, I would say Beijing was probably first of all, that was the one I went into where I didn't know anything about. I don't really know about like a lot about Chinese music in general, like in terms of like rock music, and it was probably the most diverse show. They had a band that sounded like Discharge. They had a band that sounded like Madball. They had a band that sounded like Comeback Kid. They had a band, and they had a band that sounded like Youth of Today. So it's like very diverse, but everybody was like cool with each other. Like everybody knew each other. So it's like true unity in my eyes. People say unity doesn't exist. That was unity, to me.
Yeah, we toured China years ago, like 15 years ago now, and I found it very local. Every scene was so different from each
Mm-hmm.
other. Beijing was awesome, but yeah, the same way. Like we played with like a band that was doing sort of like street punk style, and then a band that was doing more sort of like I guess Sonic Youth, post punk kind of vibe style too. And yeah, it was an amazing time. And we toured there by train and taxi when we were like we snuck into the country. Did you guys have to sneak in too?
Yeah. it was probably it was scary. Like it was scary in the sense that like it's like what if they say no? Like, you know?
Yeah, I was more fearing like what if we get detained?
Yeah, that too. That would be
Like,
that would be no bueno.
yeah, there was a I forget another country that we obviously have snuck into quite a few countries over the years, very innocently. Like you're just like at the end of the day, all I'm going to do is probably lose money and play a show here. Like I'm
Yeah,
not.
we weren't even there like we were there a day, like we
Yeah,
we played the show the next morning, we flew out. So it was like thankfully it was only one guy at the customs and he was with us so long that the line built up and there was like 25 people in line and he saw the line and was just like just go. So we're like yes.
we took a boat from Osaka to Beijing or to sorry to Shanghai,
Hmm.
and everyone on the boat was vomiting except for Jonah from Fucked Up
Nice.
and the crew. But it was yeah, it was definitely terrifying walking
Oh
in and being
man.
like, I'm just a tourist. Like with these, I don't know these random other people from Toronto that are with me. They're just tourists as well. Coincidentally, we all met on the boat, but we got
Yeah.
in. We got to play the shows.
We're just a day into Beijing because we're going to Hong Kong tomorrow. So
Was it? Were the shows big in like places like the like Thailand? Because like I went to Thailand once again a long time ago now, but searching for punk and hardcore, and I could not find it. I know it exists, but it was definitely very underground in my experience.
um it was like a decently sized show. I would say I'm so bad at like determining the amount of people. Maybe like 150, 200
Wow.
tops. That might even be pushing it to be honest, because I'm so bad at this. But it was one of the best shows for sure. So Thailand has a really cool band out there called Whispers right now that's kind of popping off. And it was like those guys are the ones that like kind of picked us up and like brought us around and stuff and booked the show, I think. And oh man, yeah, Thailand was awesome. All the bands were cool. They had like it was that was also a very diverse show. We played with this band called Grimtooth. They opened. They kind of like sounded like uh New York hardcore, a la like Straight Ahead, AF, Warzone. They covered SSD, so kind of gives you the vibe. Then there was a band called For Decision, and they sounded like a Victory Records straight edge, strifey band. And then there was an Oi band called Foolish the Bastards, and they were kind of older heads. I actually have a sticker on my water bottle here. They were awesome. Um, did did a Cock Sparrow cover. Pretty much every band did covers like a lot, and some of them would be like current bands that I'm like friends with. Like one of the bands covered like Magnitude, and Monument X. I don't know if you ever because they've been a band for a minute now. Monument X played, and they were like the Youth Crew Revival era sounding band, and they were awesome.
I the only record I have like for Thailand, I've got like do you know this Tiananmen '89 record label?
I don't.
Oh, it's this guy from Max Rock and Roll that did this thing years ago and like he would put out records from scenes that didn't necessarily have any records from him, like vinyl. He worked for the UN, so he'd travel around and just kind of like in his time off, just get involved in the punk scene and go to shows and get tapes and then make these records, send a bunch back to the place so they'd have, you know, vinyl copies of their stuff. So he did one of bands from Thailand, and there's some great bands on this, but once again, like Toilet,
Mhm.
Doc, Mahawk, who does a John Fogerty cover on this. Not quite as good as a Coxbar cover, I have to admit, but I guess the cover tradition goes back then. But yeah, like there's like I learned that most of what I know about international punk and stuff I've learned from these compilations, and because I feel like now it's gotten a lot better, and your knowledge about this stuff is way better than mine because there is a better communication system set up. But prior to that, it was dependent on Max Rock and Roll Scene reports and people like Tiananmen '89 putting out these records. But that's the thing that makes this awesome is the fact that there are scenes all over the fucking world.
I had such I had a few heartfelt moments. I think in Malaysia there was a point where I just like got kind of emotional, like not teary eyed, but like on the cusp of being teary eyed, where I'm just taking it all in, and I'm like, this really is such a united, like this like scene as genre of music is so connected worldwide. Like these kids, they just want that they do the same things that we do in terms of like the same drummers in like five of the bands in their local, their local area. They're all just going off for each other sets and like wearing like a lot of American band shirts, like I just felt like I was at a show home, but like not because obviously like language barrier and stuff, but it was just so wholesome. Like just seeing everybody so happy and having fun and you know, people like knowing who like my band and like going up. Like it's just so crazy to me that this is a thing.
What was Malaysia like? Like, have you seen that documentary? I think Days to Confuse, or maybe the Fader put it out. Maybe the Fader put it out, and it's like about Malaysian skinheads.
Oh yes, actually during lockdown I was going on like a punk like documentary kick or like music documentary kick, and I did kind of watch something about that. Um, I don't think there weren't any skinheads at this show. It was mostly just like younger kids, but it was cool. It was cool. It was a little small scale, but it was very like genuine, like high energy.
Well, like, what other scene is there where you're able to do that? Like, go around the world and play, like, even if it's a smaller scale show, where there's like another scene of kids that are like, yeah, I'm about this too,
I don't think there is one.
and to do it on a DIY level. Like, I'm sure DJs can do it, you know, and bigger name artists, but also there's not necessarily the exchange in that same sort of way. It seems like maybe it is on a deeper level, but like the fact that we all know Japanese hardcore and like we'll freely admit that Japanese hardcore is probably the greatest. Like Burning Spirits hardcore is probably the perfect like hardcore scene, like sonically. Oh yeah, that side. Did you see
It's a
them
bootleg.
over there?
Not over there. I saw when they came to New York. Um, I want to say I always want to say a few years ago, but time's been flying. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
They did two shows in New York City. I don't know, like 6, 7 years ago at this point.
I
Um,
I saw them in Tokyo at the Chelsea show that they did like when I was over there years ago. And I
mhm.
gotta say, the footage I see from the New York show looked way crazier than the vibe of the show that night. I think people were definitely into it and very respectful of them, but like I think people are like, yeah, we see this band a lot here, whereas when they came to America,
Oh,
it
it was
was like,
so good.
yeah,
Tattoo Array was good too. That's who they played with, and
yo,
I jumped into that band. Like I've listened to them, but like not you know what it's like seeing a band and then you're just like obsessed with them for like a while. That was me with Tattoo Array.
and you know about the wrestling connection.
No,
Oh, that's
no.
Kojima's brother on vocals.
What?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know it.
I'll
I
send
had
you the
no
picture.
idea.
I have a picture of the two of them together from this. Like someone sent me to the podcast years ago a photo from a New Japan book about wrestlers and their families, and there's a photo of the two of them together. And the guy translated it, and it's like I think he's like Kojima's like my brother's tougher than I am, or
That is crazy.
yeah, there's crazy stories about them. Like when we were in Japan, I was asking a guy at a record shop about them, and he's like, "Oh yeah, they were scary. Like the first show they played, he was like grabbing people out of the crowd and just doing like shoot like suplexes on the
That's
stage to
awesome.
people." Yeah,
Yeah, I don't really know much about that band, like on like a nerd level, but now I
I
want to. Now I want to know everything.
yeah, they're like one of those bands. Like there's just so many in Japan. Like in terms of the bands that have like, because it's wild the deep connection between pro wrestling and that type of punk and hardcore. Like Burning Spirits is I think it's an Antonio Inoki quote about Bruiser Brody, like seeing the burning spirits in his eye and taking that and like building a whole genre around that. And like Jonah from Fucked Up when he's on tour with Forward talked about how like yeah, those dudes just talk about wrestling all the time and
That's
like
sick.
practice wrestling moves on each other backstage.
Hell
And
yeah.
there's that guy Crazy SKB who has like some wild hardcore records. Had a record on ADK, and but also does just like insane deathmatch stuff where he like kind of specializes in fire.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and it brings rest. He got attacked at a bunch of shows by wrestlers over the years too. Like worked in advance type thing. But
Yeah, that's cool. That needs to happen here more. I know like death matches and like hardcore and like metal are like very like tied together here. I would say like these current times, but
I think going back, it's like not that ECW had like a lot of guys going to shows, but there's like punk and hardcore connections in ECW, and back then there I think the Robbie Brookside obviously is like a unicorn, being
mhm.
like such a deep head into what he is. But I find there's like kind of constantly ties to punk and hardcore. Have you seen that photo of Bret the Hitman Hart wearing the Sex Pistol shirt?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I went to a This Is Hardcore once, and the Blue Meanie was there. I got a picture with him. It was cool.
Well, you also know Bubba Ray, right? Like you guys are like,
Oh man, did I tell you that story with him?
no, no.
All right, so this goes back far. Like when he was in TNA at the time, he was wearing uh the New York Hardcore vest. It was like the vest with an NYHC, and I was heavy on TNA back then, and I think I like called him out. I was like, what do you know about this about New York Hardcore? So I like tweeted at him. It was just like, oh, I see you're rocking. I used to just talk shit to random like older wrestlers on Twitter just because I don't know, like we would just go to like a diner after a show and just do that. And I was like, what's your favorite Agnostic Front record? Like, and he was like, Victim in Pain. Like he responded, he's like, who's the poser now you want to be? He's like, go back to Mass. You're not, whatever. I don't know, some wrestling heel stuff. And like a couple of my friends also were like tweeting at him, and he just blocked them all, but like didn't block me. And then like I was just like, oh snap, that's cool. And then because Dudley Boys are like one of my
One of
top
the
two
greatest.
tag teams. Yeah, it's like Road Warriors and Dudley Boys are like my top two. And I was just like, oh, that's cool. And throughout the years, he would just occasionally respond to like random like hardcore thingies. Like he'd be like, I'd be like, oh, I'm in New York for a show. Where are you at? And he'd be like, oh, I'm hanging out with H2O. I'm here in the back or something. Like just like dumb stuff like that. And then during lockdown, my homie had like a signed Dudley Boys poster. And then I sent it, I tweeted at him. I was like, yo, look what I just got. And he's like, yo, I'll send you a better one. So he did. He sent me two pictures. One that said, Keith, get the tables. And then one that says like stay hardcore or something like that. And then I would always be like, yo, you should come to a show like that we play for like Restraining Order. And he's like, just invite me. And if the stars align, essentially, like I'll be there. And then we played the last Nightbird show a couple years ago. And I told him about it because it was in Asbury. and that's like his like hangout grounds, I guess, or whatever, or was back in ECW days. And he was just like, "Yo, I can make it." And sure enough, he showed up. He was just like, "You didn't think I was gonna show up?" And I was like, "Honestly, no, but respect." And there's like a video of my Andy from Tear It Up. I'm sure you know, like took a video of like us playing, and then it pans over to like to Bully Ray, and he's just like with his phone out, just going like that, and it's like really funny.
Uh, it. I talked to him one time on the phone. I was on Busted Open
Yep,
with him one time, and then my last question was like, "So you into punk and hardcore?" Like, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I fucking love Madball like AF."
yep,
So he must have gone at shows.
yeah. I never like question him about it, but you know, there's a picture of Taz wearing the Biohazard shirt, right? You
Yeah,
ever see that one? So I'm
yeah.
sure like he got turned on to some cool stuff.
Bob Mold went to. Oh, sorry, Bob Mold told me that uh, uh, Jesse the Body came to a couple of Husker Du shows, and the Replacements guy said that he would come to replacement shows too.
That's sick.
Yeah. So there is this weird connection. I find like they're both like subverting their respective things, like wrestling, sports, and punk, like rock and roll.
Especially something like wrestling where they have like a strong like DIY side and ethic to it. You know, it's like this in the same sense that there's like a punk scene of people booking shows and doing zines. There's like promoters doing indie wrestling and like booking like indie wrestlers, and it's like a similar vibe.
Yeah, I think like another thing that has been interesting to watch is the hardcore punk takeover of pro wrestling, where
Oh yeah.
like it's got like every wrestler now, not every wrestler, but there's like so many wrestlers that are at some level like involved in punk and hardcore. Like fuck, Seth Rollins named himself after Henry Rollins. Sami Zayn went to shows. Like CM
Mm-hmm.
Punk went to
Yep.
shows.
Yep.
And that's just like the one company.
Yeah. It's interesting, but I'm a like hardcore and punk has so many like root like every it's like the root of so many different people you just don't expect. Like I feel like it was just such like an important. It was such like a cool new thing that drew in a lot of like people that you don't like all types of people that you fast forward to current times. It's like select like actors and different like bigger bands and stuff. They're all like, yeah, like when I was younger, I went to go see this band, or like there's always some kind of tie.
Yeah, because
I've
I think it.
noticed.
Well, I think it draws like interested and motivated people that wind up doing interesting things later on in life because they're motivated. Like there's nowhere else where you can like we're talking about travel the world making this music or
Mm,
just put out like your own magazine and have it be something that will one day be studied in university classes. Like there's so many people that have been on the show that did the zines that I talked about in school. Like just because they made an impact with it. So you can do what you can kind of choose your own adventure with this thing.
mm-hmm. And it's such like a wild. I don't want to say violent. Well, yeah, violent,
Very violent sometimes.
extreme, like you know, aggressive form of music where people are just like, if you walk into some like for the first time, you walk to a show and you see like people stage diving and creepy crawling and like singing along and slamming. It's like, what is going on? Like it's so like
But
it's the
I think
coolest
that,
thing in the world.
and I think some people are going to be like, "Oh, I fucking don't like that," but they're going to be inspired to kind of do their own thing
Mm-hmm.
away from it, and that inspiration will lead them to kind of make their own little, not little in some cases, obviously, but like not to diminish them, but like their own scenes,
Yeah.
and that's the I don't know. I find like the rejection of stuff is so cool. Like when people like are like, I fucking hate that band. I hate that band so much that I'm going to go and start a band that doesn't sound like them. That's awesome. It's like you still inspired them to go out and do something. There's still inspiration.
Or like when emo was a thing, and then there was like all these bands that were like super anti emo, so they're like writing all these songs.
Yeah, obviously, as long as you're not being hateful and violent towards people that consensual violence is obviously a big part of hardcore. But
Yeah.
then what does it hurt? That it's motivating you to make art.
Yeah. Was it like the power violence bands that were like, oh, like that like super anti emo aesthetic?
Yeah, yeah. And like, I think that the reality is they were all like, emo kids too. Like, I think that's we're all like,
Yeah.
we're all from the same place, and we just kind of like take the ball and run different places with it. And
It's all fun in games, you know.
yeah, and it still goes on. That's the coolest part about it, is that it's not just reflecting on something that happened 20 years ago. It's or 30 years ago or 50 fucking years ago with this music now. It's still happening.
Oh yeah.
Well, Keith, this has been awesome. And anytime you want to come back on and talk about anime or punk and hardcore, you're always welcome. Less about the anime stuff because I really am limited in what I know, but punk and hardcore definitely.
I'm always down.